Good afternoon. Again, great to be in another informative day in Benzinga. It's exciting to be talking about whether it's the topic that's officially storefront to supply chain, boosting wholesale and retail. The bottom line is this group is very adept, but has experience in talking about how they're building the brands. And ultimately, I guess if the expression is something like, life is what happens when you're making plans, companies are what happens when you're building brands. And ultimately, whether that channel is retail or wholesale, I think we've got a tremendous team here to talk about it. Again, just want to quickly introduce everybody. Sandy Lee's the CFO of Wana Brands. John Levine, who's the CEO of MaryMed. Jamie Mendola, who's the Chief Business Development Officer of AYR Wellness, and Richie Proud, who's the CEO of Ianthus. So welcome everybody. And again, a group of professionals that have seen the evolution of retail and building brands. And so maybe I'll start out with you, Sandy, but it's really to the group, because I think philosophically, whether you're in very sophisticated traditional CPG, and again, I think this crew knows a lot about that as well, whether is retail the tail or is retail the dog? In other words, is wholesale a function of what retail is telling you? Is wholesale really what's driving what the consumer wants? And I think everyone here kind of has a view, but I'm not sure the industry knows yet where it's going to be. So Sandy, jump in.
Thanks, Tim. Well, Sandy Lee and from Wana Brands. As you know, Wana Brands is a wholesale. We right now we're at 20 markets in the United States. 9 markets in Canada, and also, as you hear news, that we're also in Europe as well. Yes, back to Tim's questions, that it's a brand building. Wana, everywhere, of course, we got a Colorado business, but also 20 states, out of state, everywhere you go, and you have the same quality of our products. That's the brand we're building. Even for the partners, that every market is a market, but for the brand building, yes, everywhere you see, you hear, and the look, the quality consistent is the same. So yes,
no,
wholesale.
I think it's look. I think to Wana's credit, and I think both your capital markets and kind of the history of the company and your partners and your strategic partners says that this is a company that has built a wholesale brand, a brand that I think on a national basis, certainly the things you're talking about, which we all know, consistency, predictability, those are a big part of it. John, MaryMed has some home markets, so to speak. There's certainly some parts of the East Coast that I think you've always called home, but this is a company that's also been very opportunistic in terms of building your business in Illinois or other parts of the country, and not necessarily being focused on asset heavy. Maybe they're licensing deals. So give me your philosophy here, because it's clear that MaryMed, by the way, has whether it's Betty's Eddies or other brands that I think are well-known brands. You've kind of evolved the strategy, it sounds like.
Yes, at MaryMed, we're a big believer that brands are the future, and we're really concentrating on making sure that we're doing the proper research and development of our brands to make sure that we're giving the consumers exactly what they're looking for to be able to use the cannabis to the best of their wants. And our Betty's Eddies to our Bubbies to Vibations is a real concentration on making those brands even bigger in every state. We go into a state, our Betty's Eddies jumps up to #1. We started in Illinois with a branded license with GTI, and we've moved into many other states with licensing, but brands are really the concentration. But it's the consistency of making sure that the brands are always like a Coca-Cola, that you're getting the same flavor, the same texture, the same effects, so that branding is a very difficult thing, but you really have to make sure that brands are what you're concentrating on to make sure that you're part of the future.
Jamie, from a retailing and a purchasing perspective, what do you think is what's separating for AYR, what makes the wholesale successful? And again, maybe how have you seen that evolve in the last couple of years?
Sure. So I think it's interesting sitting on top of both the retail and wholesale organizations, because from the standpoint of the data, that you get at retail to be able to see what's actually selling, the selling price, the margins, and the traditional KPIs that most sophisticated retailers use. I would say 3-4 years ago, those weren't used quite as effectively within the cannabis industry. I think every company is probably on the journey to use those in a more advanced way. I also think there's a big change from 3 to 5 years ago, where a lot of the vertical operators, were really pushing their own product to the store, and it was a little bit early, from a brand equity standpoint. You're now clearly seeing across many of the markets, whether it's Wana, Stizzy, Rove, et cetera, the same 5 to 10 brands are pretty successful in almost every market that they launch in, right? So what you're seeing are some of the incumbents that had the first mover advantage start ceding share to the national brands that are well-funded, that know how to activate in market and generally move into a leadership position if they execute well. So we're sitting there from the retail standpoint, and we obviously have our own brands as well, but we're making sure to really partner with those brands because ultimately that's what the consumer wants. And so as a retailer, you need to have the right set of merchandising and the right mix of premium, down to value, goods. And I think we've done a really good job of having our own house brands and upping the quality there, but really leaning in with the national brands that drive a lot of traffic.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the balance here, and this is why the industry's kind of working together, figuring this out along the way. Richie, you bring a very deep background in traditional, and again, I'm not sure what we're calling ourselves here, but I'd like to think we're traditional as well, people. But whether it's Abercrombie, going back to the apparel industry, where some of the infrastructure, but obviously the blocking and tackling of wholesaling is something that is well ingrained. How did you come into this industry, and how did you quickly assess where Ianthus could be, and what's the reality of where you are?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to be able. It's a great opportunity for us to be able to think about the business just a little bit differently, right? I think that when I look back to my life in traditional fashion retail, there were things that we were doing in 2006, 2007 that today are cutting edge in the cannabis space. And that's really interesting for me to think about. But I attack most of what we do from a retail-centric perspective. We have 40 dispensaries across the country and predominantly a retail business versus a wholesale business. And so I think when I think about this topic in particular and the role that retail, wholesale, and brands play inside of a business, you think about the cannabis space as being, we have to be nimble. We're always moving in different directions. We're always pivoting in a lot of different ways. But those pivot points force us to make decisions. And where do you get the most information? You get it inside of the retail locations. You get it by learning and listening to your consumer and being able to understand what your consumer is telling you. And cannabis companies struggle with that for a lot of ways. I think certainly wholesale-specific brands have a very lasered-in focus as to who they are. But we have an obligation inside of this industry to be able to continually raise the talent, to raise the expectations, to set new expectations, to meet a sophisticated consumer, to meet a diverse consumer and where they are. And we're an industry that's evolving. We're evolving into wellness brands and lifestyle brands and being able to actually engage with consumers' interests and needs. And when you're able to do that inside of a retail environment, you get these learnings that you can then pass on to your wholesale business, or you can pass on to your wholesale partners that better let them connect with the overall consumer. And that's what it's about. And when you think about consumer from a retail perspective, customers vote with their feet. They walk into your store, and that's the vote that they're making is where they're going to spend their time. But from a wholesale perspective, you have to think about customers in two different ways. Not only do you have customers who are visiting your competitors' dispensaries and seeking out your brands, but you have that other business as a customer of yours, and you have to service their business needs. And it's a tightrope that we walk constantly, but it's a fascinating intersection for me. And certainly from a financial planning perspective, merchandising allocation, trying to envision the store of the future is really what's important, because as Jamie was saying, cannabis looks so different today than it was 5 years ago, but that evolution is more modern. That evolution is more business-centric, and it's more forward-facing to the consumer.
Well, and we think about, and with all due respect to the cannabis consumer, I'm not sure, and I guess I throw this to the group, do you feel does the cannabis consumer know what they want? Does the cannabis consumer, yes, we obviously see trends, and we have plenty of metrics to reinforce what sells. We know segments, but and therefore, and I would start with you, Sandy, I guess, as you think about also again, you sit at it in the CFO's chair, and so you're trying to look at how you're entering new markets or how you're taking your traditional markets and again, executing. Are you focused on a consumer that you think is there, or are you focusing on the consumer you think you have right now?
So Tim, the question is that you don't know, right? So you go to a new market, and of course we're wholesale. Back to the data in the cannabis, it's lack of data, and especially a wholesaler, you don't have a lot of direct consumer data. I came from Parallel. I have a few Parallel alumni here somewhere that Parallel has retail stores. You can look at consumer data. You can see that, wow, okay, I see consumer behavior, so I can purposely target it to those, but wholesale you cannot. But for us in the one model, you go to different markets that you, first of all, you gotta make sure that you do have a good partner or not. They share your similar vision value. And another one is that you gotta look at it, really have a line for your financial model, operating model. End of the day, I know we love concept of cannabis over here, but fundamentally, as the CFO says, even any operators, you think, could we make money, right? So, but when you put a model together, it's a lot of times with the partners is that it's about education as well, right? So we're in so many markets, we go in, we say, okay, so what have been working and what is not working? How can we help our partners to not only manage the brand side, but also from operation, from a working capital, from a cash flow, from a talent acquisitions. So we product value adds to our partners. That's what we look at. Back to Tim.
John, again, expand on that, or again, the philosophy on how you view the customer. Do you view the customer through the wholesale lens or the retail lens? Because there's slightly different assessments.
Well, being in the industry longer than anyone else up here, I got to tell you,
Okay.
I've been through a lot of changes of what the customers are looking for. It's not just the retail customers, but the wholesale. You got to be thinking of both ends of it. We're really looking at the end user and what they want out of the use of the cannabis. And one of those things was always precision dose, security of knowing that when you're taking 5 milligrams, you're taking 5 milligrams. You want 50, you want to take 50. And that was a big thing that we learned many years ago. And all of our products are all about precision dose, consistency, and the value of what the customer is looking for. We've done a lot of research both on the wholesale and the retail side to make sure that we're doing the marketing to reach the customers, to educate them on what the brands are, why we are bringing the brand out to them, and what the benefits are. We want to have it so that the customer will always feel comfortable when they buy that 10 milligrams, they know they're getting 10 milligrams. If they cut it in half, they're getting 5. But it's also the consistency of the product, the taste, the flavor, and the result, whether they want to sleep with our Betty's Eddies Sleep. That is one of the top products in every market, if not the top when it gets into the state. But everybody says that that product makes them go to bed comfortable, sleep through the night. And now we have the PM with pain relief, and people are telling me that's even more incredible. So it's listening to the customers and bringing them the confidence.
Jamie, again, push-pull strategy, how do you see it?
Sure. Look, I think the cannabis consumer is in a very different place depending on the region of the country, as well as their evolution, on their own personal cannabis journey. But we're definitely seeing a growth in the sophistication of the questions that they're asking. But going back to your question, I think bud tenders influence 75% of all the sales. And so understanding that from a wholesale dynamic,
Wow.
right? You're trying to get ultimately to what the consumer wants, but you need the amplification of the bud tender community to really make that happen. Yes, it's supported by marketing and all the grassroots exercises, but without that authenticity and the go-to-market strategy, I've seen plenty of great brands and great marketing decks not actually execute and result in strong brands at the end of the day. But if you think about things like terpene profiles, minor cannabinoids, again, 3 to 5 years ago, people weren't talking about these things. Now, we don't even sell that many gummies that don't have some type of minor cannabinoid that is effect-based for sleep, pain, energy, anxiety, et cetera. I still think the flower journey is on a little bit of an earlier path where I would have thought by now we'd be talking more about terps and less about THC. So that's been a little disappointing, the pace that that's gone. But we're hearing that more and more on the West Coast and moving eastward. And so I think it's going to just keep getting dialed in on the effect-based and what it does for people's need states.
Well, there's no question regionally, as you say, and obviously within certain demographics, the product they want and what they want is clear. But ultimately, I feel like it does get down to, Richie, a case where are you viewing the consumer through, again, where we want the industry to be, where we expect it to be. And again, so the mass market to me is not necessarily all that focused on terpene. And if cannabis gets where we all want it to as investors and even as companies, my guess is, I think people, I mean, look, I drink wine, but I don't know a ton about wine. I mean, you live in Northern Cal, Jamie, so you could probably educate me. But the bottom line is, I want to be able to go into a wine store and make a purchase that I feel somewhat educated on, but sometimes that's not driving it for me. Or I live in New York City where, and I'm going to say a lot about myself, but if I walk into a great restaurant, I know they've got a fantastic wine list, and if I order the second cheapest, not the cheapest, the second cheapest from the bottle of red, I'm getting a decent bottle. So how are you thinking about this, Richie? Because again, you've seen it from a world where you understand the different demos here. We know where we want cannabis to be, where we think it's going to be. It's we all know where the addressable market is.
I mean, everybody here's touched on some really great points, but the part that for me really resonates is brands emotionally connect with consumers, and not everybody is a great storyteller, and we're all learning to tell stories inside of this industry. In order for your brand to resonate, you have to emotionally connect with the consumer, and so that's certainly paramount. But then you take the second step of it, which is we think about cannabis products and the role that it plays inside of our lives from a need state, mood state environment, but we don't do the best job of articulating what those benefits are. There's a great methodology, jobs to be done. Like, what is the role that a product plays in your life? What is the end use of that product? And we spend more time talking about pricing and promotions and potency versus the idea that this edible will help you sleep. This edible will help with how much you eat. Like, there are certain ways that the cannabis plant will be able to benefit you, and that's the end state of that product. And we're learning how to balance all of these kind of conversations together. And then you throw into the top of it that if wine sommeliers were able to dictate what everybody bought, no wine wouldn't nearly be as prevalent as it is. And I think inside of the cannabis space, we're still struggling with that. The cannabis connoisseurs drive so much of the conversation. You have an obligation as a business to protect your interests because they're the highest value consumers. Okay, so how do we protect that route while offering an experience that allows for new consumers to come in? And so you're balancing not only new consumer acquisition, which is incredibly difficult, but then you're having to balance consumer retention. Well, that emotional connectivity of a business or a brand is a way to really be the tip of the sword to kind of punch through that, to be able to connect with that consumer. And so, when Jamie and John and Sandy are all talking about that role of the brand, that brand is an emotional connection point that we have an obligation to connect with the consumer on.
How much is also just, so again, if our title is boosting wholesale with retail expertise, we're kind of talking about, I guess this is really almost a pull strategy. But back to, and this is for anyone on the panel, but are we seeing a case where the consumer is walking in reasonably well educated, being influenced by bud tenders, but that ultimately is making a choice based upon either convenience, so this store happens to be near me. I mean, part of the multi-state operator model, at least in a very asset-heavy extreme, is that the brand is the storefront, and where you are conveniently located. And I guess I'll also just introduce, and then get out of the way here, the idea of e-commerce, and again, how you see that fitting into this wholesale retail mix. Somebody jump in. Who wants it?
Well, I'll start.
Jump ball, Sandy.
Since we're going to take turns,
right.
Why not just get off earlier? So there are a few things. I think that, again, for some of you, of course, majority probably you are cannabis consumers, and you make your decision going somewhere that could be a location close to you, could be a product that, of course, you're looking for. I personally use our sleep gummies. I know that it doesn't really matter, right? I'll get that. And could it be the brand that you're following, right?
You look well rested, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's obvious. One of the gummies, right? And there's a lot of factor to that. But end of the day, where is this going? Back to e-commerce or not? You talk about, right? So, ideal world, working or not, talk about federal legalization or not. But end of the day, is that if this could be treated as a regular commodity or product or not, that could be remove the barriers that you go to stores. But that's a different conversation, Tim, I guess. But anyway, I'll let other panelists provide their insights.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, you were talking about e-commerce, and still with all the regulatory issues in every state, part of the problem with the branded product is also the fact is that every state doesn't let you use the same packaging with the same information. Sure. We're limited as an industry in how we can market everything and the information that we can get out there on the education. So this is still an industry that's hindered by us trying to send the right messages and education to the consumer of what the benefits are of what product you're going to buy. I heard people talk about the flour. People don't care anymore about what the effects or what the uses of flour. They want to know what's the highest THC you got. What's going to be a good smoke that I'm going to get really high. And it's just amazing that people aren't looking at the effects the way they did many years ago. Now they just want to know what the THC levels are.
Well, that's a pretty major effect. I mean, if you're smoking 35, 35%, it's anyway. Yes.
Again, it's what the consumer is really wanting and what the education is. I know we talked about the bud tenders. Bud tenders are absolutely the number one sales force on the floor to educate the consumer. But we go a little beyond that. We try to educate the consumer through educational programs within the community, in our stores. It's all about the knowledge that you can give somebody. Give them the comfort level when they come in, a program of frequent shopper, using some of the technology and formats that other industries use. That's what we're starting to market towards, and that will get more consumers to be educated more on what's out there to be offered.
Yeah, look, I'll touch on e-commerce for a minute because while we obviously can't have transactional e-commerce in the traditional sense, across most of our markets, anywhere between 30 and 80% of transactions start online, oftentimes resulting in curbside pickup or pickup in store. And so that journey is very different because you don't have that personalized bud tender experience. We're leaning in very heavily from an AI perspective with personalized suggestion engines. There's some off-the-shelf solutions as well.
By the way, if you just sprinkle AI into your next press release, your stock's going to go a lot higher. Just kidding, by the way, and no regulatory statement there.
But I think you need to help create that journey for someone that is doing that online that has, these menus can be overwhelming. In our mature states, we'll have 1,000 SKUs. That's a very complicated journey for even the most sophisticated customer. So having them be able to filter by, effect base or things that you've liked based on what you've consumed before and move to some of those personalized based marketing approaches, I think can really help the self journey of a lot of the customers.
Yeah, I mean, I would then add in the idea that e-commerce is a starting point for the journey. You're able to do as much research as you want, to become as educated as you want, and to really understand where you want to take the next step of your journey and your evolution, and that leads to trend development. Like, how do we identify what trends exist inside of the space, and how are we able to modernize that? Typically starts with doing a little bit of personal research, and as you're doing that research, you start to see the role again that different retail stores and wholesale businesses can play together, like the concept of test and learn capabilities. Like, we're not great at that as an industry, but in traditional retail environments, we would never launch a broad-based program without learning as much as we can and getting as much data as we possibly could to be able to know whether hypothesis is confirmed or a hypothesis is disproved, but we've saved our supply chain and been able to kind of pivot along the way. And so we have an obligation to be able to learn all of those things, to be able to create an environment that's safe for the consumer, safe for the bud tender, and then profitable for the businesses. And it's a complicated industry in those ways.
It is, and we've got, unfortunately, only about 6 minutes left to talk about, again, this complex industry. And so maybe this last question point that I'll introduce gives each panelist a chance to maybe express kind of the ethos of what you believe your brand kind of is, your essence, your ethos. And Jamie, you brought up an interesting point also, just about how price compression is something that ultimately is an opportunity, but to the extent can a brand hold its value and look, from a CFO's chair, sometimes this may be the best thing that ever happens. If you have price compression in the wholesale side of the business and retail holds its level, you've got a lot of margin. But and then maybe mix in somewhere, Richie. Again, you expressed to me something that I think is also pretty interesting. Building of a brand and trying to get it past the kind of the stoner image. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but if you're thinking about mass market, and look, depending on your brand and who you're trying to connect with, that the stoner message is fine. But therefore, I want to hear what everybody's brand message really is. What do you think, Sandy, is the message you have out there with Wana?
Well, with Wana, I always want back to True North, right? What do we do? What's the brand stand for? Is enhance everybody's life. What does that really mean for us, right? So if you look at us, that of course we have new products, innovation is a big focus. We're not just saying, hey, let's develop a new product, let's push it in the market or not. We do, of course, a different process, do the testing, make sure that it has, we talk about effects, right? So talk about, of course, help with people pain relief, help with sleep, have a functional or not. Yes, we're here now to get people high, right? So we're here to build a good business. Another one is that what I want to see is that, of course, again, we're working to track the best talents. What I see from this space is that, yes, we're much better than where we were before. And look at this, right? All the talents from different space being here. Some are new, some being here for a long time. But that's not enough, right? So we need more new generations. We need more seasoned executive that come to here and really trust the space, take a space to the next level. And what also here is that really get a discipline managing your financials. So of course, I have to see that financials because end of the day, guess what? If we don't make money, what's the reason here, right?
I think what Sandy's saying is sometimes the CFO is more important than the CMO. John, jump in, John. Thank you, Sandy.
Well, I was a CFO at one time, and now the CEO, so I know where she's coming from. But yeah, I mean, we have multiple brands with all different reasons that we have them. I mean, one of my favorite slogans for our bubbies is, it's the brownies that your mom made. And that's true. My mother did make pot brownies for me when I was younger, so it's right up the alley on that. But we also have our brand of Vibations, which is a energy drink. It's a rehydration and energy, and that's very funny, saying energy with cannabis. But it makes me feel very comfortable on the golf course, straight head, and it's all about giving the consumer what they want. And that's the piece of our brands that I'm very proud of, that people can understand what the brands mean and they use it for the right reasons.
Yeah, I would say in terms of our wholesale brand strategy, we've really consolidated a bunch of our form factors under our two major brands, Kind and Haze. And Kind had the benefit of being one of the most authentic West Coast brands, born out of the Tahoe region in Nevada well before it was, part of an MSO. And I think that's very important because that authenticity is the hardest thing to replicate. I can't even think of a boardroom brand in cannabis that started in the last 3 or 4 years that's meaningful, right? Almost all of them are founder-led or have established credibility in California or Colorado or some other market that they've grown from. And so we've consolidated what was a fractured set of brands under our two kind of core brand strategies and are leaning in through insights from the West Coast on solventless and live resin and other products, and quite frankly being a fast follower, right? There will be a time where we have breakthrough innovation, but I think realistically for us, our best bang for our buck and to avoid big mistakes, follow the trends in the established markets and roll them out quickly.
Fast follower is absolutely critical in retail. Richie, bring us home.
Well, I love, Jamie, how you mentioned the boardrooms and authenticity, because I often joke around that one of the most inauthentic things we can do as a business is try to figure out how to define the word authenticity, because it has to come organically from the industry. At Ianthus, we're doing a lot of growth initiatives for this year. This is a big year for evolution for us, with new brands being introduced. And as you know, the Consumer shops from proximity, how close you are to their house, and so our goal is to build a community, to focus on our number one retail brand in Florida, which is Grow Healthy, to focus on the word grow. Grow with us. What does that mean for your life and your experiences? And as we define that, it'll be an exciting journey for us ahead.
Some retail powerhouses, everybody. Great panel. Richie, Jamie, John, Sandy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.